I am Anoja Seneviratne, Director, Mitigation Research and Development Division in Disaster Management Center. So then with that short note, I would like to hand over the co-chair, Ms. Anuradha, to continue the session. Anuradha, it is over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anoja. So once again, greetings, everyone. My name is Anuradha Senanayaka. I'm a lecturer from the Department of Sociology, University of Colombo, as well as an attorney at law. So as my co-chair, Ms. Anoja, has clearly has given this clear foundation for the theme today, that is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and the sustainable development goals. We have been talking about this. I think this conference itself has been having a long discussion on this and how we can go ahead with it. So I believe today's three presentations are going to be very interesting, and my comments and the discussion we will be having at the later on. So without further ado, we can move forward with our presentations. But as Ms. Anuja said, during the presentations, if you have any questions, we will take up the discussions later. But if you have any questions, you can put speaker one. If you have a question for the speaker one, please put as speaker one and your question. If your question is directed towards speaker two, you can say speaker two. And if your question is directed to speaker three, you can mention speaker three, so that it's easy for us to recognize to whom you are directing your question to. So our first presentation, as pointed out by Ms. Anoja, it is about a systematic review of community engagement in flood and landslide early warning systems in Kegalle district. And it will be presented by Mr. Anushka Bandara from the Disaster Management Center. Mr. Anushka Bandara, are you here?
Yeah, hello.
Okay, right. So we will play the video right now, and after that we'll move on to the discussions. Thank you, Mr. Anushka.
Okay.
Technical team, over to you.
Hi everybody. I am Anushka Chamila, Assistant Director EMC. I would like to explain systematic review of community engagement in flood and landslide early warning system in Kegalle district. Content: introduction, objective, methodology, and data description, result and discussion, conclusion, recommendation, acknowledgement, references. Kegalle is affected in flood and landslide annually. As a result of, we have decided to make a early warning system for rescue people who are suffering in landslide and flood, which is caused by severe damage to people and their properties. The community early warning system is very essential for saving lives, reducing injuries, and eliminating environmental damage. Another thing is early warning system is a vital component in disaster response. When talking about the monsoon pattern in Kegalle district, there are three: May to September, southwest monsoon; October to November, northeast intermonsoon; northeast monsoon, December to February. Every monsoon severe affected to Kegalle district. Demographic condition is, so there are 11 divisions in Kegalle district, especially most vulnerable DS division is the Hiovit. As a result of, we are decided to establish a early warning system in the Hiovit division. Rainfall distribution 16 to 18. You can see in the paragraph. Beginning of the monsoon and end of the monsoon, every monsoon severe affected to our district. Calculation rainfall threshold is one of the methods being adapted to aid mitigation of the effect caused by landslide. Another thing, useful landslide risks and management, important information. Organization which is have to deal with the landslide. Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Another thing is very important. The response effectively to a disaster by implementing a simple low cost. It means a low cost early warning system and improving the dissemination of information about early warning, sign and natural disaster at local and national level. SOP CV as a guide as a disaster preparedness team and the community when facing all the hazard level 1, 2, 3, regulator level. Objective, general objective, to encourage communities to play a much more active role in their own protection. The specific objectives: 1. Analyze and determine the relation between landslide and flood occurrence with the tagging rainfall characteristics in Kagol district. 2. To introduce the end-to-end community-based early warning system methodology. Rainfall threshold analyze landslide affected area. We study MBRO landslide model, 50 years rainfall landslide incident. Flood inundation area, we study the DMC flood layers, flood inundation analysis. Community-based early warning system, installation of manual rain gauges, database preparation for end-to-end early warning dissemination, develop SOPM from community leaders to office. Description. Primary data field observation for identify vulnerable community. Interview for the register volunteer. Discussion with the village for appoint community leaders. Workshop for party preparation. SOP. Second grade digital data, flood inundation, landslide data, rainfall, books, magazine, ebooks, e-journal, GPS and IGS software, micro access database. Methodology, landslide tagging rainfall threshold model prepared by ascending the last 50 years landslide data combined with the rainfall institute, especially duration. Another thing is map and approaches incorporated with institute, soil, water, and models also reflecting geographical factors. Developed considering 30 years flood inundation data in Kerala district and based on the flood inundation map TMC. Identify most valuable population for landslide with the considering elevation of their location, difficulties to reach their communication gaps, distributes manual rain gauges and correct the GPS location of their household, and database including all the landslide and damage effective areas, vulnerable areas, and other resources need to be mitigated flood and landslide risks. Result and discussion. According to UPS rainfall landslide data, NATO October has recorded rainfall 400 millimeters over 900 millimeters and dangerous landslide incident with a more death. 2016, 19 millimeter rainfall, 48 death. 1989, 600 millimeters, 103 death. Bolakopiti. Rainfall and landslide incident had good relations to each other. And on the other hand, cutting failures, rockfalls was the result of human activities, unauthorized construction. Landslide vulnerable GN division in Kagal district, every division vulnerable, but the most of reported Rabukkana Mavanil Aranayaka, Varakapol. So, settlement had separate 100 to 1000 kiloacre areas. Uh, Flood vulnerable GN division Kagal district. All DS division has flood risk and ruan well 45. They are 67 are highly vulnerable flood. So talking about community-based early warning system, we are already distribute manual rain gauge for GN community members. We are mention is RG1, RG2, RG3, something like that. And they're collecting rainfall data and transfer the data to identify officers in divisional secretariat. At that time, the identified officers is passed their messages to divisional secretary, and he passed the Gramaldari and district secretary and district secretary. District secretary passed their message to uh, assistant director of the DNC and relevant technical agencies. Dramal passed the message to police and community evacuation the people who are facing flood or landslide hazard. We are already rain gauge has distributed in 300 and 1000 millimeter allocated area according to landslide vulnerable details. These are the high vulnerable. Awareness program has a conductor train community self-evacuation. Volunteer communication leaders has registered for the collecting and observe the rainfall data. One officers allocated for the collect the rainfall data daily basis, especially Burat Kopiti, Darnigal, Yatiantota, and Narana DST. SOP has prepared for the community leaders and the GN officers, division secretary, disaster management assistant, director, and district secretary. We can see we are already prepared the disaster database for the Kaggle district. You can see there interface of the disaster database of Kaggle district. Conclusion: Kaggle has a consist 11 GSD. Flood and language risk has consist in every GSD. And a major cost to generate a flood and landslide study area, and the rainfall threshold analysis, flood and landslide inundation models to identify the hazard and vulnerable communities. Distribute the rain gauges, vulnerable communities, prepare the SOP, and end-to-end early warning dissemination in between villages, communities, technical agencies, district secretary, DS, and officials. Conduct disaster preparedness activities, test SOP. Develop a develop database for the maintenance, flood and landslide, disaster information in Kaggle district. Recommendation: develop the flood and landslide risk assessment for GN level. Standardize the standard operation system, distribution of rain gauges in entire landslide vulnerable area, develop safety routes and evacuation centers, validation of community-based early warning system, develop web-based system for quick access and general public. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanishka. So they are your comprehensive presentation on this systematic review of community engagement on flood and landslide early warning in Kaggle district. So I think there's So far, no any questions has been posed to Anushka. And then we will move to the next presentation. The presentation is on the understanding the role of creating disaster risk resilient cities in facilitating the achievements of sustainable development city. So the presenter is that Alan Smart and the Professor Dilanthi Amaratunga and Dr. Professor Richard Haig. So over to you.
Hello, my name is Lillian Smart. I'm happy to be here today to present my work. The title of my book chapter is Understanding the Role of Creating Disaster Risk Resilient Cities in Facilitating the Achievement of Sustainable Development. The SDGs and disasters. It is important to remind us that the SDG goals, which in 2015 were mapped out and accepted by all the member states of the United Nations, is an all-inclusive clarion call towards ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. Thus, the SDGs is one of the important priorities of the world today. Unfortunately, one of the significant challenges that the world faces today is the ever-increasing disasters, which poses as a great challenge to achieving the SDGs. These disasters include, but not limited to, earthquakes, tsunamis, droughts, floods, which leads to massive loss of lives and property. In fact, the analysis of the first half of 2020 reveals that there was a minimum of 207 natural hazard events that occurred in the first half of 2020, with total economic losses of 72 billion US dollars, with insured losses of about 30 billion US dollars. Just the first half of 2020. Disasters in Nigeria. It is important to start by saying that Nigeria, like other countries of the world, with special reference to developing countries, are not left out in the occurrences of disasters and its consequences. The research conducted by Olorufemi 2080 reveals that Nigeria is one of the disaster-prone countries of the world, where the frequency and intensity of disasters have continued to increase with significant losses and destructions. Recent studies on Nigeria confirms this. Natural hazards in Nigeria consist of droughts, floods, epidemics, and others which claim lives, destroy property, and displaces people forcibly. Record shows that most droughts in Nigeria affects about 3 million people. Floods itself affects over 3 million people, while the epidemics affects about 80,000 people. These are massive destruction and losses. Aba is one of the cities in Nigeria, and it is the case study of this research. As we can see, the pictorial representation, these are places, some of the places in Aba and how it looks like, especially during and after disaster occurrences. Aba is one of the disaster-prone areas in Nigeria. A recent disaster that occurred in Aba in 2019 destroyed houses and property worth millions of Nigerian naira. In fact, the interviews identified the lack of disaster-resilient infrastructural facilities in Aba. No wonder Aba faces massive destructions and losses at the occurrence of any disaster. Therefore, the aim of the book chapter is to understand the role of disaster risk resilient cities in facilitating the achievement of sustainable development. This book chapter adopted a qualitative research design with semi-structured interviews as its data collection techniques. During the data collection, about 3 different groups of people were selected. The private individuals affected by disasters directly and indirectly in the city of Aba, the urban planners in the cities of Aba, and the academics and lecturers who specializes in urban disaster management, disaster risk resilience. Okay, these people were asked the role to identify the roles of disaster resilient cities in facilitating the achievement of the SDGs, and they came up with elaborate results. The results of the study the outcome of the study, the interviews revealed that the lack of disaster risk resilient infrastructure can increase disaster-induced consequences, destructions, and losses. The losses and destruction that result from disasters has the capacity to act as a setback to the achievement of the SDGs. That was what the interviews identified. That while the achievement of some of the SDGs can be directly affected and hindered by disasters, others can be indirectly affected. For instance, poverty eradication can be a near impossible task with disaster losses and destructions and so on. Recommendation. Having stated categorically that the interviews reveal that the lack of disaster risk resilient infrastructure facility in any city like Aba can hinder the effort geared towards the achievement of sustainable development goals. As a result of this, the study recommends that the government, urban planners, and other city stakeholders should take action in creating disaster resilient infrastructure facilities in Aba to facilitate the achievement of the SDGs. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation on this understanding the role of creating disaster risk resilient cities in facilitating the achievements of the sustainable development goals. So there we all know that to achieve the sustainable development goal, one is the livable cities. So so the research on this field are highly recognized and very much important for the implementation and to ensure the resilient cities, which we are discussing under the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So with that short note, I would like to introduce the next presenter, Mrs. Madhavi Malalgoda Aryabandhu. She is presenting, translating the guidance on gender inclusions in the global agenda into the action. Madhavi, it is over to you.
Hello, everyone. This presentation is about translating the guidance on gender inclusion in the global agendas into action. What I'm going to share with you is the learning of Duryog Nivaran, South Asia Network for Disaster Mitigation, who is the lead organization of the gender stakeholder group of the Asia and Pacific Partnership of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. As we all know, in 2015-2016, there were several major global agreements were made. Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement for Climate Change, and the New Urban Agenda. In all these agreements, the governments, development partners committed to gender and social inclusion. Let's take a quick look at what are the specific commitments. Sendai Framework, for example, signals a turning point in perception of women in disasters and the approach to address gender issues. It brings a shift from considering women as victims and vulnerable to agents of change, focus on empowerment and inclusion. Sendai Framework recognizes women's indispensable role in resilience building, disaster preparedness, management, response, and recovery. In two of its guiding principles, it emphasizes on gender, age, disability, and cultural perspective needs to be in all policies and practices, and emphasizes on the disaggregated data, including by sex, age, and disability. And under the role of stakeholders, women and their participation are highlighted as critical for effective management of disaster risk, and recommends that all actions must be gender sensitive. Most importantly, Sendai Framework also calls for coherence and coordinated action between sustainable development goals and the climate change agendas. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which includes 17 goals, has a dedicated goal. The Sustainable Development Goal 5 is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And it clarifies that while there is a dedicated goal and very clear set of recommended actions, achieving gender equality and women's empowerment is integral to each of the 17 goals, with disaggregated data being encouraged throughout. Paris Agreement for Climate Change recognizes that climate change impacts men and women differently due to their gender differentiated relative powers, roles, and responsibilities at the household, productive, and community levels. And Paris Agreement calls for gender equality and women's empowerment and the need for provisions on adaptation and capacity building efforts, and urge the member states to adopt gender responsive approaches. The new urban agenda similarly recognizes the important role of women as agents of change of the urban settings, and calls for focus on the needs of women and girls, but also empower women to deliver on their immense potential. So overall, all the global agreements have committed to gender equality and women's empowerment, women's participation, and women in leadership roles. Gender stakeholder group looked at the status of how these recommendations have been taken up for implementation by the governments and the development partners in a number of reviews. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you what are the observations against the commitments that have been made. First of all, understanding disaster risk, the Sendai priority 1. There are some efforts for gender responsive implementation of recommendations. However, there are significant challenges. What are these challenges? Systematic institutional mechanisms and capacities for collection, analysis, and the use of sex, age, and disability disaggregated data is limited. What is there is some focus on the disaggregated data collection, but much less on how this disaggregated information is analyzed and used. There's less attention also on qualitative analysis, which focus on the root causes of vulnerability and the unequal distribution of risk and exposure on the specifically vulnerable groups. So this is when it comes to data and understanding risk. The second priority is risk governance. The awareness on gender and social inclusion in disaster risk, climate risk management, and resilient and sustainable development among key government officials is extremely limited. Therefore, we don't see that the gender inclusion is promoted, or there are dedicated budgets and other resource allocations. While there is discussion and some action on consulting women and involving women, but there are no concrete action plans. And equally important is there are no adequate systems to review and monitoring to assess the implementation of these commitments. Coming to the third priority, investing in the disaster risk reduction. The main observation is there is greater focus on infrastructure, but livelihoods, early warning, community resilience building aspects are in comparison overlooked. So these are the aspects where the root causes of vulnerability would have come to the surface. So here we see a gap. And there is limited commitment to invest in addressing the drivers of vulnerability. And as mentioned, no monitoring or review of progress. An important point of highlight is that with these frameworks, the shift was made from focusing on vulnerability to building capacity and empowering the marginalized groups. However, we see that there is a continued focus on vulnerability and on servicing disproportionately affected groups with less emphasis on their active participation and capacity building. This most likely is due to the gaps in understanding and gaps in mainstreaming the inclusion into development. The ongoing interventions for gender and social inclusion we find are quite uncoordinated. They are activity or project focused. They are not mainstreamed, they are not mandatory, and there are gaps in progress monitoring, targets, indicators of progress. So even if there is progress, it's very difficult to know what is the progress that we are making. Gender and inclusion, women's leadership diversity are not adequately understood or taken as a cross-cutting common topic in the main agreements, DRR, Sustainable Development Goals, and climate change planning and implementation. So the recommendation of the given for all agreements to coherently plan and coordinate, there are severe gaps in mainstreaming gender and social inclusion as a cross-cutting element. So in all the studies, analytical studies, we can highlight some red flags which needs attention in going forward. There's continued focus on vulnerability and service providing instead of capacity and empowerment. The interventions are not geared to addressing root causes of inequalities, rather they are focused on symptoms. There's minimal understanding and interventions on social inclusion in its totality rather than on piecemeal. There's low awareness on gender and social inclusion issues and resilience building, and therefore they don't get prioritized. Clearly, lack of understanding on the collection, analysis, and use of disaggregated data. There is low capacity for collecting, analysis, and the application of data. There's lack in coherent and coordinated planning and implementation with Sustainable Development Goals, climate change action, also the new urban agenda. And as a result, the Sendai spirit for structural transformation has not been fully grasped. So what is the way forward? Some summarized recommendations are some key summary points, and I will try to capture them very quickly. In terms of understanding risk, vulnerabilities, capacities, root causes, we need to reassess and refine the concepts of understanding vulnerabilities and empowerment. What does it really mean, empowerment and social inclusion, in terms of action? And we need to engage the planners, the decision makers, and develop their capacity on this understanding. And there are no examples, reference. So we need to share good practices of women's empowerment and leadership and social inclusion from where they exist. And then the disaggregated data collection, analysis, and use for decision making and planning purposes need to be systematized. Then the lack of targets, monitoring, and progress review indicators. We need milestones for transformative change. What kind of capacities, what levels of empowerment that are required, so that there are some targets to move. And we need to also ensure specific needs of women and girls, including gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health needs, are prioritized in disaster reduction and development plans, policies, programs, and include the consulting women for this. And for all these global frameworks, there are monitoring indicators to review progress. So they need to be looked at in a coherent and coordinated fashion. And then in the governance structures, where we mentioned that nothing is mandatory, we need to mandate women's participation in governance structures. Also required is to scale up positive outcomes and impacts which we achieve at the local level with the planning and practices of empowering women and girls in a systematic ways, because otherwise it remains very kind of elusive what it really means. And we need to provide more and more information and examples of what social inclusion means in the context of disaster reduction in development in its entirety, not focusing purely from response recovery. Then there need to be investment on improving women's resilience and social protection systems, and then raise awareness on roles, rights, and capacities of women and other at-risk groups. And finally, we need joint and scaled-up programming for gender and social inclusion through partnerships, including governments, better complementarity between the government efforts and stakeholder actions, revive national coordination mechanisms for disaster reduction, sustainable development, and climate change planning, and more effective use of the existing platforms, such as the Asia Ministerial Conference, to provide the guidance, renew the commitments, and build technical capacities, engaging the governments and other development partners, and most importantly, for measures of accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madhi. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive, informative presentation on these gender issues and how these gender issues need to be incorporated into these global agendas and into the action. So now it is time for the questions and discussions on these three important topics. So I would like to invite my co-chair, Ms. Anuradha, to continue the question and answering session.
Thank you, Ms. Anuja. And thank you very much, presenters, for a very interesting set of presentations where we are going to grab different aspects when it comes to disaster risk reduction or sustainable development. So first of all, we would like to start off with the question and answer session. So we'll start off with Mr. Anushka Bandara. If you have any questions for him, you can put it on the chat box. Until that, Ms. Anuja, do you have a question to ask from Mr. Anushka? I have few questions I can ask.
Yeah. Actually, from Anushka Chamila. Yeah. So I want to raise some point in your interesting presentation that how you ensure the community engagement and the sustainability of this community-based early warning system. What is its sustainability? And for particularly for the flood, what is the lead time for the flood early warning in that area, your study area, the Dehiovita?
Especially in Dehiovita, we can see there are 25 GN divisions. As a result of, we have established especially Sitavaganga catchment area, we have established manual train gauges because of we can save lives via the early warning system, but we are keen attention for protecting and saves their properties because of there are so many flash flood, especially Sitavaganga and Kalani Ganga. But everybody's, those who are vulnerable people, they had the traditional concept. The traditional concept. We first of all, we want to change that. As a result of, we make a mechanism with the government agent. Another thing is, when implementing these early warning system, reduce the losses and damages because of the person who are engaged in the community, especially every mechanism developed by volunteers and in village level. It's mean that as a result of, we get the information via their own telephone because of they have not good mobile network coverage in manual train gauge areas. As a result of, we are getting information from their own private land telephone and communicate our voice. It means DMC voice to community when we having bad weather or someone else to transfer the message to DES, and DES forward to their message to relevant GAML GN. As a result of, we can evacuate the vulnerable people.
Thank you, Anushka. Yeah, Anuradha, it's yours.
Okay, Miss Anuja, Miss Anushka, I have few questions to ask from you. Before that, our next presenter, Miss Lillian, is supposed to have some personal commitment within few minutes. So I have a question to Miss Lillian. I hope the forum allows me to break the order and go to Miss Lillian before she leaves the forum. And if you have any questions, you can post for the speaker too, Miss Lillian, if there's any questions you all have regarding it. So, Ms. Lillian, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation, where, urban sociology is being, it is one of my main areas I'm researching on as well. And what you pointed out is almost the same in the Sri Lankan context when it comes to, the housing and, that whole, there's, different, there's development, but there's no sustainability attached to it. So my question to you is that basically, within a city, we have inequalities, even access and even to be protected from a particular disaster, your opportunities will be different. There are different vulnerable groups in a particular city. So to what extent did you try to, figure out these, different stratas in a city when it comes to, adequate disaster management, just about the vulnerable groups in a city? What was your stance on that?
All right, thank you very much for this question. I took actually cognizance of those vulnerable groups in those cities, and then because they form part of my interviewees, like I rightly pointed out during my presentation, that these people, most of the individuals that were interviewed, those that were directly or indirectly affected by disaster in that city. So I try to find out, how to actually get disaster resilient infrastructural facilities in some of the disaster prone areas, or in fact, I try to put into consideration the importance of relocating. I think it was a major emphasis in my book chapter, relocating those vulnerable groups in the disaster prone areas, especially those of them in urban slums, in informal settlement areas. And then because they were practically those that are affected mostly during these disasters. And there's no point saying that there are disaster resilient, we are fighting towards achieving the 2030 sustainable development without a clear understanding of the hazard risk or risk assessment in those cities, which has to start with the vulnerable group, looking at people that are residents of disaster prone areas and trying everything possible to relocate them. In fact, some of them were apparently relocated and they were shouting that the relocation wasn't with any alternative livelihood. So I made every effort to put this thing at the forefront of my research and recommendation, so that there will be the need to relocate people with alternative livelihood will never be relocated to the background. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Lillian. So if any one of you have a question to Lillian, you can put it on the chat box now. And it was very interesting to hear about your input regarding the relocation process and the issues where, it's just about the physical development, but not giving importance to the livelihood aspect about it. Thank you for that as well, Lillian, because it was interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. If everyone do not have a question, we can move on to Mr. Anushka again. Okay, thank you, So we'll move on to Mr. Anushka. So, Mr. Anushka, once again, thank you for your presentation, where you brought in the importance of a community when it comes to, disaster management, I would say. So, you were talking about preparing SOP and distributing it to the community. So, at the very first stage, when you all were recognizing the actors in the community, how did you all recognize the actors in the community? Was it based on community leaders from community-based organizations? How did that process take place, recognizing the community to implement this?
First of all, we visit the relevant catchment area. At that time, we are find the grassroots level. We can discussion with the grassroots level. There are so many awareness programs because of the we are already identified the DMC. We are the place to catchment area in Sitawaka Ganga. As a result of, we have find the person who are in village, especially we are already made the community-based organization. As a result of, we are easy to find the voluntary people in a particular area. Just a way to find the person who are engaged for that. So it is very easy because of the person who are in a voluntary person in a community-based organization. So
Okay, that is very interesting. Where coming up with voluntary organization. So based on that, did you all find any challenges in the field when you all were trying to find volunteers and building it up when you all went to the field? I'm just out of curiosity asking.
The difficulty is facing because of the earlier I mentioned the network coverage. No network coverage in mobile. At that time, we are using a land phone. But unfortunately, they don't have a land phone. At that time, we are talking about with them, and we are find the nearest land phone, and we are using for that to transmit the data for our officers. That's the way to find one of the difficulties. And the other thing is we are always using a manual rain gauges. But the problem is that when high rain, heavy rain, we can't get a exactly figure of that because of heavy rain. We are proposed to get a automated rain gauges for that, and the community awareness should be there, must be there, because of there are person who are engaged for that. Is a lack of educated for that. As a result, we are unable to manage for that. We are trying to make a awareness program for that. That's my challenge. That's one of challenges for that.
Thank you, Mr. Anushka, because it's indeed very valid point you embarked upon. That is to say that because no point of an outsider going and implementing a particular project in a given community without the community having the knowledge and getting the support from the community, because then there will be resistance and issues coming up in the whole process. So thank you for that. If you all, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box right now for Mr. Anushka. Until you all put your questions in, we can move on to our third presentation today. And that was by Ms. Madhavi Malagoda. It was indeed a very interesting presentation, because speaking of gender, we talk about gender in several aspects in the society these days, especially in the Sri Lankan context. And you emphasizing these issues and the red flags were very interesting and was very informative and an eye-opening, I would say. Ms. Anoja, do you have any questions to be asked from Ms. Madhavi? Oh, I can go ahead with my questions. I think there are a few comments for Ms. Madhavi as well, so we can lead our discussion based on that.
Yeah, you can lead, you can proceed.
Okay, right. So Ms. Madhavi, So you were talking about, now we have this whole discussion on recognizing gender, or rather this women's as a separate vulnerable group. So you were talking, there are like, different vulnerable groups like disabled, elders, and then women, right, ma'am? So basically within gender itself, we do have this intersectionality, like women of color, different coming from minorities, women of disabilities. What do you think the place of this intersectionality in these governing structures which you reviewed? And as you said that gender was overlooked by it, if this intersectionality also has overlooked by it, what would be the best recommendation you can give to look into gender through these different inequalities? Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone, and yes, about your question, sectionality is very much an issue. We are actually facing the challenge, first of all, not getting the whole community of women and gender at large getting into action. Now, at the policy, at the commitment levels, there is agreement. As I mentioned, all major global agreements say gender equality, women's empowerment, and social inclusion on all these three aspects. And so the gaps we are seeing is actually translating these commitments into action. So we are facing the challenge of getting the recognition that women as people with capacity, people who are very much active players in poverty reduction, in development, in risk management, risk reduction, response recovery, but constantly being identified as a group of victims who need to be serviced. So this is the major challenge we need to actually, get through. The intersectionality is something within. So, of course, it's an equally important issue, and this is why the disaggregation ideally is requested by sex, age, disability, and other categories. So once we get on to having that level of disaggregation, and within the whole community of women, the recognition of the intersectionality, that is a step to follow.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Madhavi, for that very interesting, detailed explanation to talk about the status quo right now in the Sri Lankan context. So basically, there's a particular comment for you in the chat box by Mr. Loy Rigo. I hope I pronounced the name right. Good red flag emphasized, clear recommendations by Nirvani, need to scale up empowerment and social inclusion and women's resilience. And also, there's a question being asked about how many women are included in government bodies at various levels. I was also interested to ask you this, Ms. Madhavi, like when you, with this research experience of yours and knowing the status quo right now in the Sri Lankan context, how do you, place Sri Lanka, or where do you see Sri Lanka right now when it comes to accepting women as agents of change comparing to other South Asian countries?
If you look at in comparison to other countries, particularly in the SAARC region, Sri Lanka gives a picture which at a glance indicate we are ahead of most of the other countries in the region. But it also can be a little bit elusive because in comparison we may look good, but if you look at the actual effect, I will give you just some very indicative statistics of all managerial level in the private sector, government sector. The women are positioned in less than 20% positions, right? But if you take the education, 54% of graduates are women. So you see a very big discrepancy between the education indicators and the employment indicators. So women are still very much concentrated in very stereotypical jobs like service, nursing, teaching. But when it comes to decision making, executive level, technical fields, their presence is very much less than 20%. This is for Sri Lanka. And I think the other question, what are the ways to extend further the women's empowerment and the good practices? Good practices actually is a real challenge, because when we look for good practices, they are mostly project-based or those promoted by in very selected, isolated locations. So they are not very many. There are examples from the Vietnams, from the Philippines, from India, where women-led groups are leading the preparedness, early warning. If you take Bangladesh early warning preparedness volunteer system, 50% volunteers are women. So there are examples like that, but to get those examples into the mainstream, that is the challenge now. If we look at the government disaster risk management systems, whether it is early warning or whether it is post-disaster recovery, we don't see very many good practices to show where women in the local areas are able to take part actively, be part of the warning and the recovery process. So this is definitely is not commonplace. So this is one of the points that we also highlighted, that there is a need for good practices. Now, for example, in Bangladesh, the Ministry of Disaster Management, in conversation at the one of the consultation sessions mentioned, there from all the disaster risk management national budget, something like 5% is allocated for gender issues, for women. But the challenge is they don't know what to do with that money. So there is a need for making it clear, what do we really mean when we say involve women, get women to participate, engage them in decision making, planning. This is still, it is of course very cultural and perceptional also in this region, and that is why in Bangladesh example probably it is challenging. So we need to be more clear. We need to provide more clear messages how to translate women's engagement, participation, and empowerment into action. Because even when there is budget, it's not clear how to do and what to do. A first step may be like local level planning. If we take an example of early warning system, I think what would be the most obvious thing to do is from the community itself, identify the women who are who are in a position to come forward and be part of the, the whole planning process, communicating messages, identifying the need, connect, what are the best ways to ensure connectivity, and mapping out the, what are the precautionary measures. So those are some of the examples where you can make a start.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Madhavi. It was very interesting because, as you pointed out, I think more than anything, it is about changing a whole perception in the society. And it's the breaking the glass ceiling. And now that we have been talking about it, more than moving into the next step of accepting women as the agent of change, there's a lot of grassroots level changing we have to do. And thank you for, pointing that out, because it is a very timely and a relevant particular, point you pointed out. And based on that, I would like to ask from Mr. Anushka. Now, as Ms. Madhavi pointed out, that in the local level planning, we can start off and have women involved in that in your case it would be early warning systems. So, how many? I mean, in gender wise, were there active participation of women in the community you selected for your early warning system?
At that time, hello.
Yes, we can hear you,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Anushka.
But at that time, especially we are in early warning system established in the Hewitt division. At that time, we are unable to find a better contribution for the women because of the community, especially the rain gauges is managed by men, and information sharing with them, because we are unable to participate, get a support from women. But when training program and other methodology, we are invited to share and get a knowledge from our uh, uh, strategies from that. But early warning system unable to get the support from the women. That's the reason.
Okay, thank you. I think
Uh,
Ms. Madhavi, would you like to
Yes,
add
can I
something to
ask
that?
a
Yes.
question? Why it was difficult to get the support of women for rain gauge management?
Problem is when heavy rain, the manual rain gauge is over the house, over the, it means very far away from house or building relevant places.
Mm.
We go and check and report it to us. As a result of, we are always try to get a nominate men. That's the
Mhm.
point, because not easy to get a measurement when heavy rain. That's the thing.
Okay, but there must be other ways of getting, the warning information, getting women involved other than the measurement of the rain gauge. I'm sure
Uh-huh.
there are, in the overall early warning systems,
Uh-huh.
there are many components.
Yeah.
So it's good if we can think of what are the places where actually women's participation is possible and that can be encouraged.
Especially when reporting data, the report and maintain database, we can get the support from women and distribute the information. But is one and only problem is when checking the heavy rain, we can't we unable to get the support from women. That's the reason.
No, that kind of challenges you can understand.
Yeah.
But you see, this also highlight another point in the whole question of, I go back to, okay, all global agreements, all governments agree for gender equality and women's empowerment.
Uh-huh.
But when we want to do it at local level, at national level, it's
Uh-huh.
not very clear what it means and how to do it. Now, just this one example that the rain gauges, it's difficult for women to do the measurement.
Uh-huh.
While there in any task, in any system, while there would be uh, activities by division of labor where men will be able to handle it in a more convenient manner compared to women, there will be other tasks where women will be able to handle with equal uh, competence. But
Sure.
this will not come into the picture unless you actually make a special effort. So
Okay.
because of the way our communities and societies are organized, unless you make a specific effort to get the engagement of women, even if it is for a training, how
Mm-hmm.
you promote the training, how you organize the training, the location of the training, these things will always matter how women will decide the participation.
Yeah, sure, sure.
So it's like, if I may use the word, you have to go a little bit of an extra mile for women's engagement. Now, although the global agreements say women's empowerment is not a output. Empowerment is something you will achieve when you do so many things, like allowing women to participate, improving their technical capabilities, providing opportunities to take part and make decisions, run the systems. I mean, it doesn't matter in every situation a woman has to be a leader, but by being part of a group, being part of a system, helping to run a system, or where possible, where feasible, to run the system itself. By those actions only you will support the empowerment of women. Empowerment is actually it is the process of doing something with the engagement, with the participation, with the decision making ability, by giving women the choice to do that. And this, by women themselves, it could be challenging because of our social and cultural situation. So this is why it requires going an extra mile, identify who is there, who are the women who can actually start off. And once the start off is done, it's automatically possible that others will follow. I also take a moment to introduce my colleague Ramona Miranda, who is connected to this discussion. Actually, this work is jointly between in Duryog Nivaran. Ramona and I did this work jointly together. So she's here if she wishes to comment or respond to some question as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Madhavi and Mr. Anushka. This is indeed a very interesting and a very new, I would say, a new dimension into this whole conference of bringing in the gender aspect as well as the community-based disaster management aspect to this. Do we have Lillian in the call, or has she left the meeting? Lillian? Because there's a question to Ms. Lillian regarding her concentration on non-infrastructural aspects in her study. I can see Ms. Lillian, but I don't know if she's in a position to. Okay, so Lillian has left. So I think the question I pointed out to her, she said that she were referring to the relocation process and where, people losing livelihoods. And she did emphasize on the fact that, when it comes to handling the whole relocation process, it's important to go beyond the infrastructure. But it would have been great if she was here. She would have actually given like a very good explanation on her, like the project basis. But it could be when it comes to urban development or relocation. When we speak of it, it's about dealing with people's lives from disasters. It's this different types of people, their livelihoods, and their different day-to-day lives being changed because of disasters, relocation, displacement, and even urban development. So it is definitely a very vast, it runs in a very vast dimension beyond infrastructure. And infrastructure could be like the basic point and to develop upon it. Because when it comes to infrastructure, there's like, pregnant mothers, people with disabilities, there could be like, people with different needs has to be there in when it comes to the infrastructure needs as well. So if anyone has in the, in the audience to add anything, you are welcome to add, because we only have 10 more minutes to wrap up the session. So I will quickly give like a brief briefing about the whole session to look back of what are our take home points from this session. So before I do that, Ms. Anoja, do you have anything to add upon to this?
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you very much for all the presenters who present different aspects which related to the sustainable development as well as to ensure the resilience. So basically, I want to highlight some points in these three presentations. One, that the community-based early warning system. So while doing this, when I go through all the key points you have mentioned and coupling those things with the points Madhavi has raised. So they are actually, there are some obstacles to get the support from the women for this early warning system, particularly during the hazards time, based on our culture and the and the cultural context of that Dehi with that rural area. So at the same time, Madhavi's raised a very valid point that we need to empower the women and we need to get their capacities to enhance this early warning. Particularly, women are more generous than the men, and so that I mean they are take care of the things and they do disseminate the early warning. So they are that capacity and the commitment we need to enhance while doing this community early warning dissemination system. So I want to highlight that point, as well as then for these smart cities and these that Lillian's presentation. So actually the strategies, there are, I mean, uh, well recognized that broad strategies are there. So I think this is the implementation of the Sendai framework as well as the sustainable development goal phase. So all these broad strategies we have to convert into the action. So in our research, we have to focus that part also, because now we are having a very broad strategy, comprehensive strategies. Now the practitioners having the issues that what these strategies and how to convert these into the actionable things, and then how to implement these things. So I think we have to discuss that part also. Then for I have one suggestion for the gender things also. Now, I mean, for a certain period of time, we are discussing this disaggregated data and this, I mean, the women participation and all these things. So during the disasters, we are getting that how many women's affected and how many death and like that. So as per my personal view, all these things, I mean, that we are discussing all these questions and the things we are raising with the negative information. So what is the impact? So, I mean, if we can uh, switch on to the positive things. So as that, I mean, how many women engage into these things and how many women contribute to uh, safe and secure the families. So that type of data, I think we have to consider, because women's participation, we have to look in a positive way. Now we are collecting the data of the death affected and then some gender-based violence and all these things. So now actually as a the one engage in this disaster management sector. So personally, I thought that, I mean, why we are not looking at these matters like, I mean, in different way. So the contribution of the women's, and we need to highlight apart from this, I mean, the negative data on the impact of the women and all these things. So anyhow, I would like to congratulate all the three presenters, and I would like to congratulate these the researchers to continue this research and share your output with the society, with the implementers, planners, and all. So then they can incorporate all these findings in their next plans and next decision-making steps and all. So with that, thank you very much, Anuradha, and it's over to you to conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anuja. You've been an amazing co-chair, and it's an honor that I got the chance to chair this session with you. And once again, congratulations to all three presenters. As she correctly pointed out, we were talking about the broad social impact when it comes to Sendai framework as well as sustainable development goals, because these studies are best explanations for us to understand that, you know, there's policy in the paper, but we have to go beyond that and put it into action. It could be we talking about the disaster management, it is implemented to community. So getting the community involved in the whole disaster based management was one aspect we discussed about. And the second presentation was about the cities and how cities, the urban development can be used as a disaster risk reduction strategy. So speaking of that, we also had the discussion how it is important for us to go beyond infrastructure and to see the social, the livelihood and the community impact in the city as well, because there are inequalities within a city. And the third and the mostly discussed point was gender, which was connected with the first two presentations as well, because gender is important when it comes to community-based disaster management, and within a city we have different women with the intersectionality aspect as well. But as it was pointed out, we have a far more to go, that extra mile, as pointed out by the third speaker, that extra mile in changing the attitudes, the extra mile in changing how we perceive gender when it comes to this disaster risk reduction strategies as well as sustainable development goals. So having said that, it was a very fruitful discussion we had in all these three aspects, that is the community-based disaster management, resilient cities, and the gender involvement in disaster risk reduction and sustainable development goals. So once again, congratulations and thank you very much. And I would also like to thank the audience for being amazing with the discussion we had with the questions. And with that, we can conclude the session. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.